All right, we're going to get started here. We, as you can tell, are missing one of our speakers, who I'll introduce in a second in his absence. We'll be joining us quite soon. But, in the interest of time, I'm really keen to kick this off. Welcome, everybody, to Manchester Art Gallery. My name's Joe Hill. I'm the Policy Director at think tank Restate, which is a cross-party public services think tank based in Westminster, but also up here in this room, and I think another room in this building, for a few events over the next few days. So if you're here as part of a fringe event for the Conservative Party conference, you're in the right place. And if you're here to see art, you're also in the right place, but maybe a different room. Thank you very much for coming. We're here today with our first panel of conference to talk about what a Conservative vision for remaking the state looks like. We've got a fantastic panel lined up or imminently on their way. We're lucky enough to be joined by Claire Coutinho, who's Shadow Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, Charlotte Pickles, who's Director of Restate, and soon to be joined by Alex Burghart, Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, here to discuss the important question. I guess as a framing point, you know, we are a year into a new government, 14 years, give or take, after a Conservative government coalition, thinking about key questions about the shape and the size of the state. And this is a topic for us which is really crucial at the think tank, and one we wanted to front and centre having this conversation. What does the future of this British state looks like? What are the factors which are going to drive that? How do the next 15 years look different to the last 15 years? What's the role the Conservative Party can play in that? Rather than asking the panel to kind of respond to a specific question first, I'm just going to ask them to give sort of general opening reflections, I guess, to the question of what does a Conservative vision for the state mean for you? Claire, could we get started with you?
Thank you so much. So I would say there were various things that we did in government. For example, educational standards, Brexit, whether you agree with it or not, welfare up until the pandemic, the jobs and investment revolution that we had post the financial crisis, which was actually out of line and much better than a lot of our peers. But the mistake that I think we made is that we never remade the state, and we never remade it in our principles. So when you think about a lot of the changes that happened, and in some of the places where we went wrong overall, is that a lot of the fixes were add-ons. They constantly expanded the state, they took on more responsibilities, but they didn't have clear principles behind them. And I think now when most people think about the state, and this has been true for some time, and it's true in different countries as well, I would argue that they think of it as big, remote, and dysfunctional. And actually Conservative principles would be to make it small, and I don't mean as in spending, although I do agree that spending should be lower, but I mean more localised, more relationship-based, and more single purpose, so it can be more functional. And the thing that I found in government, so if I give you an example from energy, is that the system is now littered with these bodies. So in energy, sort of about 20 years ago, there was Ofgem, which is meant to control costs for consumers, arguably not doing it very well. It started with 300 people, it now has over 2,000 people. And alongside that, you've got the National Energy Systems Operator, which looks at supply. You've got the Climate Change Committee, you've got Great British Nuclear, you've got the Office for Nuclear Regulation, you've got the Environment Agency, you've got the Planning Inspectorate, all of that gets involved with energy infrastructure. You've now got Great British Energy, which does exactly the same thing as the Infrastructure Bank, which also does the same thing as the National Wealth Fund. So you can see that whether you are an individual or a business, trying to navigate government now is near impossible. And the other consequence, I think, of having that sort of expansion without sort of clear principles behind it is one of the other things that I saw in government very much is if you think about the Burghart grasshoppers versus the cows in the field, and the silent majority, government is now really designed to listen to noisy grasshoppers. So when you are in government, the ideas presented to you via the civil service are almost always from lobby groups. It might be big charities, it might be think tanks, rarely right-wing ones I should add, and it's always through the prism or medium of someone else that isn't the public. So a prime example, I would say, is in the education department where I worked. It was much easier for people like Stonewall, who were pushing a very radical gender ideology, which was very far away from where the public were, to get in and talk to civil servants about that, than it was for parents to talk about their worries about schools being closed during the pandemic. So the other, I think, thinking we should have is how can you remake the state so it listens more to that silent majority, so it can have a much more balanced view. Because the other sort of big problem that I think generally is happening in society, partly because of these changes, is that we are the party of institutions, but people have lost faith in their institutions. And I would argue that actually that's because the institutions have got further and further away from public opinion. And so if you want those institutions to feel, and people to feel like it's part of them, then they have to share their views. So I think having a state which is smaller, more localised, more relationship focused, and more single purpose, that can be more functional would be my changes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. Charlie?
So as Joe said, we're a cross-party think tank, so I can't answer the question of what the Conservative vision is, which Claire has done brilliantly there, and hopefully Alex will come and add to as well. But I can give you some sense of the work that we do. Our tagline here is literally remaking the state. That's exactly what we exist for. And there'll be one bit that I disagree with Claire, but by and large, I think a lot of the observations that Claire has just outlined are bang on in terms of the challenges that we're facing at the moment. I think one of the biggest issues is that we really just haven't had the conversation, the really fundamental back to basics conversation of what is the role and shape of the state? What should the state be doing? And obviously, the next part of that question is, what should the state not be doing? And Claire talked about the expansion, and we can look at the public finances, we can look at the growth of the welfare rolls, we can look at what's happening in most of our public services where we are spending much, much more, the demand is increasing and increasing, and often more complex, but just the sheer amount of demand, and the state has expanded to a point, and simultaneously the public don't think it works, right? I mean, there's a few kind of good, positive exceptions. The passport office, brilliant. But most people would probably prioritise getting the NHS working, or schools, or the justice system. And so we have this much expanded state that people are really largely dissatisfied with, that the people who desperately need to be able to access services, those who do have complex needs, who are more vulnerable, are actually struggling to do so, and yet a lot of people who probably don't need to in the same way are still coming forward in this kind of tidal wave of demand. So I think there is a fundamental question to answer, which I think Claire is starting to do with her remarks, which is, what do we actually want the state to do? And I think there's a couple of issues, and this is where I'm going to slightly disagree on one of the points that Claire made. We hear a lot about building a relational state, and the fact that we want a state which can, in literal terms, have those relationships with the individual. I wonder if in doing that, we're sort of trying to design civil society, and we're trying to replace parents, and we're trying to, replace lots of faith institutions that actually already do a lot in this. And so I worry when we talk about a relational state that actually we're really saying the state should be doing everything, when I think there are far better placed institutions and organisations. And that's not to say the state shouldn't fund some of those services, but actually let's take welfare for an example. And I worked in the Department for Work and Pensions for a couple of years with Ian Duncan-Smith in the Coalition. And I would argue that Job Centre Plus is a terrible place to try and get support to people with complex health needs, for example, to move into work. I don't think Job Centre Plus can have a relationship in that way with people it's trying to help. I do think there are brilliant grassroots charities out there in local communities that have really specialist skills, can actually build those relationships with people with complex needs who should be the people who are delivering those services. But we seem to have got to a point where we think the state should be the entity that does a lot of that. So I think there's something about what we actually mean and who is best placed to deliver things. I also think we've ended up with a just phenomenally regulatory state, and this is a piece of work actually that Joe is launching and doing for us at Restate, where we've created a kind of ratchet of regulations, and the state has, in the same way that it's tried to it's expanded into so much of our life in part because of what happened in the pandemic, and we can debate that. but it's also tried to extend into all parts of our life via regulation, which again has created this really risk-averse, complex stuff that Claire talked about with multiple quangos in public bodies, and actually the state is getting in the way of a lot of the things we would want to see as outcomes. And I think we have a process state. We were trying to debate on the train up here today, like what would we call it? You know, is it the kind of bureaucratic state? Is it the technocratic state? And we need technocracy, right, in certain places. Like you want really, really competent people to run parts of the state. Like, you know, that's a given, right? You want competent people running the tax system. You want competent people actually, you know, delivering the court system or whatever it might be. But I think we've got to a point where actually process is more important than the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And part of that is about risk aversion in the civil service and Whitehall. And part of it is just because it's a hell of a lot easier to tick a box than actually try and change someone's life or actually try and overcome the productivity crisis that we've got in so much of our public services. So I think there's something about how do we get back to a more balanced model where actually we can take some risks, people have more autonomy, more freedom to innovate. We do have, to use that slightly old phrase, kind of some more sort of public entrepreneurs in the system where we can get better models. And so just to finish up, what do I think some of the things are that we might be able to do to actually then remake the state? Well, Claire made a brilliant argument about public bodies, and we wrote a report where we called it quangocracy, and that's what we have now. So 60% of public spending, 60% of public sector spending goes via public bodies that are not being led by elected people. Like the distance between the elected person and the person making decisions about how that money is being spent is totally broken. And that's unacceptable in democracy, and it's unacceptable that actually accountability and transparency is not there. We have no idea really what's going on. And the complexity of our public body system is getting in the way of building houses, of actually getting cheap energy, of actually thinking about how we support the various people that need state support. Workforce, we have a huge programme which we call Reimagining Whitehall, which is focused on Whitehall and civil service. And if you look at just the tar-like system, you know, you're trying to walk through tar to try and get change. So we don't have the right talent. We sure as hell aren't getting rid of poor performers in the civil service, and this is one of the things that civil servants themselves kind of, you know, are so frustrated by. You know, we're not willing, and this may not be popular in this room, but we're not willing to pay enough for actually really highly skilled, really high talent people to come in and transform how our state works. And if you want great people, I'm sorry, they don't just do it for the goodness of their heart, right? Part of that is the motivation, but actually you should pay a fair salary if you want really, really great people to come and run the government. You know, look at Singapore or other countries where they do that. And we need to be far better at using data, at deploying AI. We still have people doing process admin stuff that in the private sector hasn't been done for years and years and years. It's crazy that we have this model. We also need to go even further on devolution, and this was something the last government, Conservative government, really pioneered and really drove forward, and we're seeing a bit more on it, but there's still so much more scope, and that is where you could create better relationships. You can integrate services in a way where you have less waste, less duplication, much more seamless approach to people's often complicated lives. And finally, and again, this is one of these things where, as a think tank, you kind of, you know, we don't have to have anyone to actually go and vote for us, which is great, because we can come out and say the things that are less popular, like please pay civil servants more money. I mean, have fewer of them, but pay them more money. And the other thing is have way more political support. If you actually want to get into government and you want to build the state based on your vision and your values and deliver the stuff you want to deliver, you can't do that on having, you know, 4 ministers or maybe up to 6 ministers in a department of thousands of people, plus maybe a couple of special advisors. That is madness. We need to enable governments of the day to actually have people who are aligned, who are going to drive forward their priorities and their policies, and that's why it's important, I think, if you're going to think about how we improve the state, to ensure that actually our political class that are running the government have sufficient expertise that is aligned to what they're trying to achieve in order to do so.
Thank you both very much. Alex is texting me saying that he's running to get here.
It says 4 minutes. 4 minutes away.
He knows what we're talking about. He can't wait to get involved. But whilst he runs, I'm going to keep pressing on, and he'll just have to play catch up. If we think of the state and its role in society as a spectrum between defence of the realm and a bunch of other things, and kind of at the other end maybe kind of programs to brush children's teeth in schools. And we think about where the Conservative Party and the Conservative vision of the state should be on that spectrum. I wonder, like, if I could ask each of you, what's something the state shouldn't be doing, what's something the state should be doing, which we're not talking about, and is key to you in this kind of Conservative vision.
So I was just going to, actually this feeds into this, because it's going to come back to my point about relationships, which is, I actually agree with you that the state is trying to overwrite some of those relationships. So when I talk about it being more relational, I mean it being more aware of relationships. So let me give you some examples. In my constituency, actually, I have one GP area where they use health champions, which are local people in the neighbourhood who know everybody, and that they will encourage them to do stuff. They now do sort of bingo on a Wednesday, they do walking club on Tuesdays, and all of those things. None of that is state funded. That's just civil society. But the thing which is different in that part of my constituency is that the NHS works with them. So the GPs will sometimes say, do you know what, we've got someone who might want to get to know them. Just another example, I was writing this report on parenting, and again, another one from health, which I think is particularly bad at this. They were saying that we know which are the women who are going to get postnatal depression. And I was like, that's interesting. How do you know that? Well, you know, we can see that they're going to have a child. They don't have a partner. You know, they don't have any family nearby. And so we can pretty much tell that it's going to be them. And I was like, oh gosh, so what do you do? They were like, well, we wait until they get the depression and then we give them medication. And like, that, again, to me is, you know, if there was a local mums group, all of those women could just meet each other. So again, it's just thinking about the fact that relationships are important. And one of the things, I'm not answering your question at all, Joe, so I've gone off on tangent, apologies, but one of the things that the state is really bad at doing is humanity has all these moments of magic, you know, whether it's the bond between parent and child or between neighbours or whatever it might be. You know, the power of faith groups or all of these like magical things that we can't measure. And when I found that the civil service can't measure something, they sort of pretend it doesn't exist because they need to have an outcome that they can quantify. And that's what I mean about everything getting very big and remote. So all of these things which are brilliant, are good things and don't get a look in. What was your actual question then?
So I think you've answered half of my question, because I asked you two things. One of which was what's something the state isn't doing and should be, where I think I can put you down for a much more relational approach to health.
I think there's probably a lot of things like that. So something which I saw when I worked with the CSJ, which looks at very vulnerable families. Often people in those families would have 16 specialists. You know, they were already very frazzled, their lives were already very complicated, and then they had to work out how to meet all of these individual people in their lives and manage all of those meetings to get the various bits of support which sits in these tiny little pots. So I think the microphone agrees that was an important point, I wanted to emphasise it. But I think that's an example where every single department which has one of those programmes will ruthlessly protect that programme existing, as opposed to thinking, well, for that person, they could probably just do with one person. That specialist person could deal with all these programmes, and they would just have to know one person and be able to work with them as much as possible.
So for the second part of my question, which was what's something the state shouldn't be doing, maybe I can put you down for kind of protecting these kind of silos of public service delivery rather than thinking about the person in the ground.
Yeah, and I mean, like I just read out all of those different bodies in energy. Which one of them is actually protecting consumers? I mean, look at Clean Power 2030, which is Ed Miliband's plan, which is a clear disaster, obviously terrible. If you look at the price of offshore wind that he's going to sign up to this year, he said he's willing to pay up to £117. Now, the price of energy right now is about £80. So that gives you a sense of the amount that he's going to increase the price of energy, and those contracts exist for 20 years. So this is pretty much the PFI of the energy system. It's an obvious catastrophe waiting to happen. Which one of those bodies that I read out have you seen anything from saying this is going to be terrible for consumers?
I don't think I've read any. Charlie, what things should the state be doing and shouldn't the state be doing?
So I think there's a really important point there from Claire about who's protecting consumers, and I think this is actually quite a common theme in how the state operates now. So if you think about it, Claire, you used the example as well at the very start around like you know, you go into a school and all sorts of people can get in there apart from the parents. The parents are probably the most important people that should be engaged in how a school operates, and yet actually they get very little of a say in how it does. And I think you could argue that in health, and we do a huge amount of work again in health and care, and actually I find we have so many conversations, and how long have we had this, where you're saying, oh, we need a model that puts patients first. You know, for decades we say this, so can we build a patient-centric model? And I sit there and think, but the entire system is about patients, no? Like, isn't that the entire point of a health system, is to treat patients? And yet, we're struggling to get a patient-centric model. And why is that? Because there are so many vested interests in how the state operates, and whether you're talking about the BMA or Royal Colleges, who are all doing absolutely legitimately what they're there to do, which is to represent their members, but there's no one there to represent the patients. And I think that happens to parents, whether it's schools, it's consumers. And I think there's something about how the state operates and is designed, and whether that's a stop doing something or start doing something, it needs to do it a hell of a lot differently, because actually it's not serving the interests of the people that it's supposed to be doing. And I think that probably is one of the things where, if we could work out how to better put at the heart of the public services we deliver the people that they are there for, rather than the people who run it. And I think that's quite similar actually to the civil service, where, you know, it's a very good model at kind of self-perpetuating and kind of, you know, designing itself in a way that benefits those in it, rather than the people that are necessarily there, that they're supposed to be supporting. I'll shut up because Alex is here and that's far more now.
Definitely answer the question. Thank you, Charlie. Alex, we've been talking about a conservative vision for remaking the state, and I asked Claire and Charlie to start by giving their thoughts on what the role of the state means to them, what the conservative vision of that is.
Well, Joe, fine, sorry, is that button on?
Yeah.
I'm very sorry I was late. I was watching the Leader of the Opposition give a bloody good speech, and I didn't want to distract from it by walking off the front row while she was talking. I think what Kemi's just been saying in the main hall is sort of a representation of what we're debating here. The idea that we will leave the European Convention on Human Rights, leave a very broad set of rules which have developed a sort of life of their own, and have come to prevent democratic governments from doing things that people, the general public, want them to do. And I think that at the heart of questions like these is, what do we want the state to do? What are the specific tasks we are charging it with? And have we set up the mechanism of the state in such a way as to enable the delivery? And I think for a long time that hasn't been the case. And as sort of, I think Charlie was saying when I came in, what you have are a series of incentives and rules which are not geared towards the delivery of policy objectives. They are either designed to protect the working environment of particular unions, or they're designed to follow a series of health and safety rules, or they are designed to manage risk in a way which is ultimately stultifying. And I think that we have to upend that. We have to get back to the sort of world that was not unfamiliar, 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago, where you have ministers and departments who are empowered to do things. They're empowered to make decisions. And if people don't like those decisions, then there are elections. That's, that ultimately we use democracy as the ultimate form of accountability, rather than trying to second guess every judgment as it comes through. And I think, so in answer to a very high level answer to your question, Jim, but I think what we're seeing today is really the first step in the Conservatives redefining how we will treat with the state.
Thank you. This kind of builds on some of the things we talked about, but I wonder if it gives us a different lens. I'm going to ask you all, just to summarise, what you think the Conservative Party as an institution should learn from its time, its 14 years in government. The Leader of the Opposition said there's a time since the election for reflection on the party and plenty of things about its values and policies, but also on its ways of working and how it what its record in government was. I want to, maybe Claire, could we start with you and then Alex and then Charlie, just sort of what lessons should the party learn?
So I think if it's a lessons learned, we've talked a bit about sort of the principles of the state and what I think the Conservative principles should be. But the lessons that I think we should learn is similar to a point that Charlie made earlier. There's 118 ministers in government, there's 500,000 civil servants. So if you aren't very clear about what those principles are, and who knows, by the time we're in government there may be a set which aren't my set, it might be a different set, but you have to be very clear what your approach to the state is. Otherwise, all that will happen is you will have this. I remember actually being a junior minister and talking to a very senior cabinet minister who was famed for the ability to change departments. Probably guess from that who that might be. It's a shame that there was only one that really sort of owns that title, but anyway. But the point is, he gave me the same advice that everyone tends to give, which is pick 3 things when you go into the department and fix those 3 things. And I remember at the time being sort of bemused, being like, why would you only be able to fix 3 things? You're a minister, if more is broken, you should fix that too. And it was almost kind of, we had given up in thinking that we could do more. And that, I think, comes from a mindset which is not conservative, which is basically saying we, the state, must fix every problem, therefore there's limited resource and there's limited manpower to do that. And actually, we should get back to the mindset of going, what are our principles to reset the system? Because actually, if what we want to do is, take roads as an example. Instead of having every 4 years a road investment strategy, I think I was involved with 2, 3, potentially 4, where we give you a blob of money and everyone tells us which roads they want, we'll choose a few and then we'll do those roads. Maybe we should think about how else we could do roads. Maybe we should think, if there are people who want to invest in roads and fix roads, how do we make that happen? So actually we don't have to hold the reins of every single thing with it all being fully funded by government. And I think that's the mistake that we made. We didn't think enough about the systems and going, what's our principles for change and how do we do that so that there's a million choices that can be made out there in the world which we've enabled but we haven't necessarily all done ourselves.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex.
Well, I completely agree with everything that Claire has just said, and I won't repeat it, but I will sort of extend it. I think that one of the sort of the cruel ironies of having the sort of Claire had a very senior job, I had slightly more junior jobs, is you kind of get to the election where you're kicked out, and you've just about worked out what you would do if you were about to enter power. It has been the case in recent British history that you're then kept out of power for a period of time whereby you forget. And when you see this on the faces of, incidentally, I think we will win the next election, please nobody read into that I think we're in a prolonged period of opposition. But you see it on the faces of Labour ministers, that they genuinely thought that government was slow because we were bad people and we were sort of rubbish, and they've gotten in and they've discovered that it's not like that. And they're not getting anything done because they are rubbish, but that's sort of different. And it's sort of implicit in what Claire was saying is that if you don't know what you want to do when you get into government, when you walk into a department, it's over. It's too late. Government comes at you at 1,000 miles an hour. You don't have time to sort of sit down and shoot the breeze. What do we believe? What are our principles? And what should we, what are we going to do over the next 6 months? It's too late. And so you have to be ready. But I think there is also a major challenge, which is becoming, I think, there is a growing understanding and consensus beyond a small group of people, as the tradition was, that the wiring of government is itself no longer fit for purpose. And that is everything from the way in which the centre operates with departments, the way in which secretaries of state can operate within departments, and that as part of a process of renewing our opinions on the state and our attitude towards it is something that we are doing very deep thinking on. I'll have to
Very. Charlie, what lessons should the Conservative Party learn from 14 years of government? And feel free to draw on any of the reports your think tank has published, but mostly the ones that I've read.
Well, Joe, it's funny you should mention that. And actually, a great segue from what Alex said there. So my answer would be immediately care about the machinery of government. And I think it links to both, actually, Claire's and Alex's point. So it's absolutely right to say you've got to be clear on what you want your department to deliver. Like, the one thing that the civil service will do is fill your time, fill your red box, kind of come with lots of, reflect on this, and maybe you can comment on that. Notice I'm not saying decide this, but kind of reflect and comment. So unless you're very clear, and I went in, as I said, with Ian Duncan Smith in 2010, at the time, obviously, the welfare reforms, and we went in and we knew exactly what we wanted to do. And you can debate whether universal credit is the right or wrong answer, but we were very clear that's what we were delivering. And the department had to move. It had to move to do that. What, of course, is very well known now is the department didn't move very well at all times to do it. So we had that clarity of purpose, but what we didn't understand at all was that actually the machine wasn't always built in order to deliver, even when you have a clarity of purpose. And one of the other things that I think the former Secretary of State that Claire was probably referring to also did understand was that you actually do need to be quite ruthless in saying, I don't want these people doing that, I want these people doing this, I'm going to bring in these experts, I've got people I trust who get it. So that combination of saying, I am crystal clear that we're delivering this, I don't want a debate, I don't want to discuss options, I want you to tell me how. That's what the civil service is there for. Not to decide what, but to decide how. And I'm clear what the what is, you tell me what the how is, but you need to simultaneously also be willing to grip what is often a very slippery, very process-focused, as I said at the start, very slow, very good at not taking any accountability at any level. And I used to sit there, and I'm sure both Claire and Alex would have seen this on, steroids compared to what I saw, but, why are there 100 people copied to this email that only needed to go through? Well, I'll tell you why, because then nobody has to be responsible for what happens, right, because everybody saw it. So rewiring the state, or, what we would call reimagining Whitehall, which is what our programme is called, that is so important. And actually, that's where the role of the Minister in the Cabinet Office, Alex, your shadow role, is also so important, because there are some big things that have to change about how Whitehall operates, which are about terms and conditions, they're about working patterns, they're about building actually multidisciplinary capable teams, it's about bringing talent in and getting really poor performers out of the system. It's about totally changing the culture of how Whitehall operates, and if you can have that clarity of purpose and you can have a machine that can then deliver against that, you would be able to remake the state.
Can I ask Charlie a question?
Go for it. Absolutely.
And then I get these guys prepare questions. So one of the things that the civil service has always been incredibly bad at is letting outsiders in, so it ends up being very close bubble. And I'll give you a quick story. So I had social care for children, social care in my brief. The IT that they use is terrible. It's like from the 1990s. They can't share information. It's very bad. I went to one visit and saw this. Was like, right, we're going to fix this thing. Brought in Anthony Finkelstein, who was a scientific advisor to our counter-terrorism effort, so he knew exactly what he was doing. We had real trouble for months, and eventually we realised that there was 20 people in this team, which was digital social care, and they said to me, actually, we don't really know anything about digital, so we don't really know what you're talking about. So I think you could reduce and pay more. But there's a fundamental challenge, and we've seen this time and again, when people bring people into the civil service, and then the civil service just isn't able to accommodate them work. How would you address that?
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely true. And I think part of the problem is how we bring people in. So if you're bringing in a single lone voice, and often what we do is we bring people in to do a review, or we bring them in to look at a particular thing, right? They're not actually coming in as a member of the department in whatever standing, so that they can roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty and actually have power. And that's one of the challenges special advisors have. right? Which is that as a special advisor, or you know, another variation of a political appointee, you can't actually order anyone in the civil service to do anything, right? I mean, you can try, and plenty do, but you can't actually. So I think there's something about, and we have actually seen this current government, the Labour Party, do this a bit about bringing people into really quite senior roles, whether it's Director General level or you know, maybe a more senior level Director level, and actually bring those people in decision-making, kind of empowered roles to go through and say, well, I'm clearing out this team, I'm moving these people, I'm going to deliver stuff. And I think the risk is otherwise we just, as I say, bring people in on a temporary basis to do reviews, to kind of think about the problem, and as soon as they go, the machine just kind of, you know, just kind of, it just disappears again into it. So, look, I think we have a, as I said at the start, I think we have a huge problem with ministers' ability to appoint people that are really, really good, they trust, capable, etc. You know, we have had examples that have been done, extended ministerial officers, that kind of thing, but you really do need to be looking at the top of the civil service and thinking, have you got the people there who can drive change? And that might mean, you know, upsetting some who seem to think that the civil service should be entirely separate from the government of the day, which is just crazy, right? I remember, in fact, a former permanent secretary saying to me that the problem is that people think that the civil service has to be like a kind of a politically neutral, right? The civil service isn't politically neutral, it's apolitical, i.e. it has to be supporting whatever the political administration is of the day, and I think we forget that, and that's why it's perfectly reasonable to appoint people to senior civil service roles, as long as they're qualified to do that role, if they are, or in part also because they're aligned to the things you want to deliver, because that is what the civil service is there to deliver for the government, which is inherently a political exercise.
Alex, did you want to come back?
Yeah, sure. I think Charlie's entirely right, and my experience of hiring externals was that when I was at the Cabinet Office, was in the Cabinet Office for 2 years before the election, and it was when ChatGPT appeared, sudden revolution in AI, and I said we should have an AI unit in Cabinet Office to be able to build stuff for us and advise us on efficiencies and where this technology is going. And they'll all need to be external people because nobody in this department knows anything about AI. And you know, if it hadn't been for the fact that Prime Minister Rishi was personally supportive of this idea, it would never have happened. Yeah, Cabinet Office hated it, Treasury hated it. We had all of these sort of ridiculous things. Well, they'll have everybody coming in will have to be paid on civil service pay grades. Well, we're asking people to leave very highly remunerated jobs in the private sector and come and work for the good of the British people. We can't sort of pay them £60,000 and expect to get the best people. And I just, it was a lesson in, firstly, making sure that you have, in the current system, making sure that you have the support of the person at the top, but also that it can be done. It just ought to be a lot easier. And to Charlie's point, the moment we were out the door, it got started. It got moved to a different department, downgraded, started to be managed by civil servants and a lot of the externals who would come into this sort of wonderful, vibrant startup, well, that's the price.
That helpful though, if anyone here wants advice and practical ideas on how to affect the kind of changes our panel members talk about, I encourage you to go to www.we-state.co.uk, where there are several papers listed which touch on many of these things, including AI, talent, and external appointments. Wouldn't be doing my job. That's it, I think, for questions from me. We're going to go to questions from the panel. I'm going to lay down some ground rules for you guys in the audience on questions based on past experience. Just as a matter of politeness, when you ask your question, if you would just stand up and tell us your name and your job, where you're from, when you do that would be great. Rule number 2, please only tell us that bit of your CV and not the rest of it. We sometimes get at these events people's full life stories, which is very lovely, but not always useful. Part 3, I would really like questions to be short so we can get as many of them in as possible and get short, direct answers from our panel as well, hopefully. And point 4, which is a hard binary choice. If your question is not a question but is a statement, I will just talk over you. We only want to have questions and discussions. That's it. Who, bearing in mind all 4 of those rules, wants to go first? The gentleman at the back who's quickest.
Yes. My name is Mohammed. I work in finance and nothing to do with government. but I've worked in volunteer charities many times before. It's like I get a charity to deliver government service. That's one question. Charities are generally found far less efficient, and they're also generally very specific in one little thing, and so they can't do the general stuff of government funding service.
That's a great question. Thank you. I'm going to take a couple more and then pass them out again. I'm going to go Rosie in the front.
My name's Rosie and I work at Restate. I thoroughly enjoyed the panel, thank you. As the restater with more of a larger pro-state instinct, I wanted to offer a bit of a provocation. The panel's
Is it a question, Rosie?
Yes, it is, don't worry. The panel's largely focused on where the state overreaches or where it fails, but does the panel have just one, if you're going back to first principles, one place where the state actually has legitimately corrected for an unacceptable failure, whether that's been in the market or in society, and where actually the state should be continuing to intervene, if not enhancing its intervention?
That's fantastic, thank you. Yes, and then we'll take one question for Lady in the...
Hi, I'm Catherine Bracknell, I'm a party member, I'm North Wales Area Chair. What I want to say is that maybe this time in opposition is time for us to think, maybe at a different level, is that we think about the social contract between people and the state, not just what the state is delivering. Too many people have got an attitude that I exist, therefore I deserve everything, and pay nothing back. It's got to be like a favour bank. There are those of us who volunteer, like when I was involved with Scouts, and the parents, oh no, you're all getting paid. No, we're not. So we allow, we in Britain have got quite a unique culture. We've got the volunteers, we don't use them, but there's too much acceptance that the state should provide everything, which I've become far more aware of since I've got an Indian son-in-law. And when you look at what happens in the rest of the world, we're just giving everybody everything for nothing, and there's no payback.
Fantastic. Great set of questions. I'm going to pass all these out, so not everyone is going to get a chance to answer everyone, unless they really, really want to. I'm going to ask you, Charlie, first. Can charities play a role in delivering the services the state currently does? Because that was your point.
Well, I suppose my first comeback slightly would be that there's an awful lot, in fact, great swathes of the state which is fundamentally inefficient and nowhere close to as specialist as it should be. So, we have a productivity crisis in most parts of the state right now, most parts of public services. So, it's a bit like when people say to me, oh, but look, you can't do devolution, right, because local government's so terrible. And I kind of point and go, have you looked at how central government's doing? I think we have to have a fair baseline comparison. There are plenty of charities which are operating on a shoestring and getting incredible outcomes. And that is the part Claire and I talked about at the start around when you have particularly people, I think Claire, you gave the example of, the individuals or families that maybe have 16, 17 different services around them. Actually, you will often find a charity that can build a really good, strong relationship with that family to have some of the difficult conversations, to actually understand how you unpick that family's lives, what services to put in place. I think oftentimes there are charities who do a far, far better job. I mean, hugely better than arms of the states could do. And I think, again, that's similar. There's lots of evidence of specialist disability charities that are really effective at getting people with complex health needs into work and sustaining work in a way that the state has woefully and repeatedly for decades failed to do. Are there inefficient, charities? Are the charities that don't achieve anything? Of course there are. Of course there are, and therefore you would want, if the state is funding them in some way, whether that's local government or central government, we should know that they're efficient and effective, right? But there are certainly ones that are better. And I think on they're too specific. The thing the state should be good at, right, is the generic universal stuff, right? The state should be good at processing your tax return. The state should be good at the mass activities, right? Like the administrative thing. The state should be brilliantly competent and largely steer clear of the kind of more specialist interventions in human lives. And that's why charities or other organisations can actually be far more effective by being more specialist, because they understand the issue that they're trying to address in the way, or the locality in which they're trying to address it in the way that the state just is never going to do.
Fantastic, thank you. Alex, I'm looking to you for Rosie's question. Is there a place where, and there are plenty of examples from the last couple of decades, whether we've changed the role of the state or grown it, is there a place where you think that we have the right balance between the role of the state, the role of the private sector, the role of kind of communities and civil civil society?
I think one of the areas that I worked on when I was first involved in politics was children in care. And you have to, you know, if you take the view that there are some children who, for their own safety, cannot be left with their parents, then the state has to provide in some way, even if it's just the state stepping in and finding them foster parents or a home to them. And I think it's an enormously important role of government, and always will be. And I think that sometimes we don't take it seriously.
Fantastic, thank you. And then final on this round. Oh, Claire, you want to go?
Well, I was just going to add two things. I think one, in terms of where we could be doing more, actually one of the things that's happened in the state is we become very focused on creating regulation. So regulation here, regulation there, and what we don't do is enforce them properly. So I would basically reduce the regulations a lot, but actually have enforcement and support us much more. And I could give you an example. HMRC is a good example. So if you are someone who has to give in their tax return, you get no support. If you screw it up, then you probably can't get them on the phone. Even if you can get them on the phone, you might get a letter in 6 months. If you get it wrong, then you might get fined and you might get all these other scary letters. And that to me just seems wrong, because if you want to apply for benefits, well, here's all these helpful steps. But if you're trying to pay your taxes, what support is there? So I would much rather there to be support and enforcement about a smaller set of rules, but you're really sort of supporting people than the other. And the other thing I would just say is charities, I think, are a great thing. But one of the things that the state does naturally is lean towards big charities. And actually the big charities in this country are lobby groups. And we are often funding things which are deeply unconservative and deeply political. And the smaller charities who are doing the phenomenal grounding work that Charlie talks about don't really get a look in at all. So I think one of the problems that the expansion of the state has had is to move away from philanthropy, from congregations, from neighbours, feeling this sense of obligation to each other, which to me is much more effective. So I would rather the state, again, just to come back to this, state as an enabling force rather than the state doing everything, I'd much rather we funded community spaces and then let people do whatever it is they wanted to do in them, than say, you have to put that service on and we'll do it through a big charity, and that little group of neighbours who wanted to do something just won't get a look in at all.
I think we've probably answered Claire's question as well about the balance between the sort of social contract. But was there anything I was going to ask you, Claire? Was there anything you wanted to add on that particular point?
Just, I think you're right. I think basically some of the expansion of the state is denuding those groups, because it's almost like one of the things I said earlier is that the state doesn't respect the magic it can't quantify, and these things are magical. Rotary groups, Scouts groups, neighbourhood groups, your local neighbourhood watch. This is the magic of society, and I worry that the more that we take those responsibilities away, the more we are denuding ourselves of these great joys.
And I think just very briefly to add on that, which is I think absolutely right, but also we now have a state model where the sort of sense of fairness, I think, has been slightly lost. And so if you look at welfare, it's a good example where, there used to be a really strong contributory principle in that. So you pay into something, you get it out, and actually it's almost entirely now being removed from the welfare system. And I think that raises quite fundamental questions about the legitimacy of certain systems. So I think that idea of rethinking the social contract and what does it mean, and what am I responsible for, what's the state responsible for, what should I have at the community level, what should I have at a state level is actually one of the most fundamental questions that we can answer right now.
Fantastic. I'm going to take 2 more questions, and that's I think all we've got time for. The gentleman on the aisle at the far back. Yes. No, sorry, behind you. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is John. I'm a private individual and I work in the industry. My question is very strict. With the uncertainty, policy uncertainty around green infrastructure and clean tech and clean energy, how do you manage the investments, the investments coming from the private sector and the uncertainty those investments come with, now that there are, things are not clear around the policy around the green tech and net zero?
Fantastic, thank you. That's a great question. One more. Any takers? Yeah, gentleman there in the front.
Good afternoon, my name is Jamie McGowan. I am the group leader of an opposition group on Burnley Borough Council for the Conservatives. I completely agree with what's been said. I'm looking at it through a prism of local, with my local eyes at the second, because it does feature into the way the state operates. And I definitely agree with a lot of the waste that's being spoken about and the officers' control that is over the local authorities that we have. The big question for me is we're going through a process of local government reorganisation at the moment, big unitary authorities in Lancashire. How do we avoid moving into a situation where the control that the officers have at the moment, in my mind through the incompetence of those who are running the council, the elected ones, doesn't just get put into a bigger, more powerful unitary authority which will be at the detriment to local residents where I am?
Great question. It's always good to get an outing for our local government programme, which is also very big at East. I'm gonna ask you, you coming on John's question about like crowding in private sector investment and policy uncertainty around infrastructure and energy. It feels kind of right history.
Yes, so look, I think there is sometimes a role for targets in government. So I think this is the referral to the fact that we said we will repeal the Climate Change Act. But the one thing that I would push back on, and we've seen this in other countries, I mean, the most famous example is Germany, but we've seen that elsewhere as well. When government sets targets for businesses, whether that's for the amount of wind farms they want to bring online or the number of boilers they want to be replaced by heat pumps in a society, if those products are not ready on time, or at a price that the public will accept, not only do those targets fall, but often that government falls, and so you get a even greater correction than you might have otherwise. So targets that are going to make things more expensive for people, whether that's energy or home heating or cars, I don't actually think give the certainty that businesses think they give, which is why we've rejected them. I think it's much more stable. And if you look at the progression of all technology over time, it's much more stable to say what government will do is give you the right kind of landscape. I'm not against supporting some industries, but I'm wary of us trying to support so many with subsidies through people's energy bills, because at some point you'll just go to break. And I think we are at that moment, because if there's anything we need to do for the country, it's bring down the price of energy. We have the highest industrial electricity prices in the world. So we need to get that balance right, which is why we've said we will repeal the Climate Change Act. And the one thing that I would say is, this is the country which has been at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution. It's been at the forefront of building nuclear. We were the first country in the world to build nuclear. We were at the forefront of the financial revolution in the city. There are so many things that we have been able to be at the forefront of without all of these quotas and targets by government. And often when you do get those things, what you end up doing is raising costs and ruining those industries. So I do think we need to be very pro-innovation. I think ultimately innovation will be the answer to so many of our problems, but we need to think about the effective innovation landscape.
That's great. And then I guess final question of the day, then we're Alex. Local government organisation, knotty subject to be sure. I guess I think the kind of bigger, the larger point in there maybe is kind of how do we avoid creating lots of the dysfunction we've talked about in Westminster and Whitehall, just at a bigger and bigger level in these kind of regional local governments which we're creating.
I mean, that's an incredibly important question, to which I'm not sure I have an answer. I think that I'm very wary of local government reorganisations. In my experience, when somebody comes along and tells you, if we just do this reorganisation, we'll be able to save a lot of money, everything will become more efficient and you'll feel the difference. And time goes by and the changes take place. They tend to take place at a slower rate than they were promised. They tend to cost more money than was envisaged. And at the end, a lot of money is being spent and everything is about the same, in some cases slightly worse. And it goes back to to the general point I was making about government. If you're going to make a change, you need to be absolutely certain what is changing and how it is changing and how you expect to see improved results before you embark upon it. And that's as true for leaving the ECHR as it is for local government reorganisation, as it is for starting universal credit. If you go into these things half-cocked, you will get that result.
I think that's a great point to wrap up on. So that's all we've got time for. I'm sorry plenty of you had questions, but we have the room for a little bit of time afterwards if you want to catch that person and make that point that you didn't get a chance to make. All that's left is just to thank our 3 panellists for speaking. Thank you all very much.